Thanks. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining. It's definitely been pretty interesting in the show so far. So many quality conversations. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about how to integrate security into the application lifecycle, but perhaps not from a kind of all the way to the extreme right perspective, but more in practical terms of leveraging existing skill sets and the existing people and personnel in the company, and a little bit about what Fortinet how we help our customers in their journey to the cloud in that regard. So let's do a little bit of background of evolution in terms of how compute has evolved and how we really got to where we are at today from an overall compute structure. So computers have evolved and application architectures have evolved. We kind of started all the way from mainframes that were pretty kind of large monoliths that ran a certain base of code. And as the technology matured, we've kind of become more exposed to the opportunities that modular applications bring to play and how we can start separating different pieces of applications and scaling them out, maintaining them, managing them throughout, and so forth. But then we fastly learned that some of these architectures are not very efficient when it comes to consumption and utilization of hardware. So we kind of started with the virtualization type architectures where you'd plug together multiple different functions in the form of virtual machines into on top of a hypervisor, max out your hardware, and invest in as much as possible. And then we've learned that that's also inefficient because there's a bunch of repeatable code that's running on multiple of these virtual machines. So we the private clouds have become more prevalent, really, and taught us new ways to build applications that are a little bit more efficient, leveraging containers and serverless technologies and so forth. But what's kind of common to these different scenarios is there was always the inside and the outside. There'd be what I perceive to be secure, trusted, and my own stuff versus what's other people's stuff and not secure, not trusted. And that's been something that's been around and fueled the whole economy of perimeters in a very logical and easy sense over the last maybe 3 decades or so. The real question is how relevant is that when we're moving into the cloud? So when we're moving into the cloud, I think this notion of a inside-outside all flowing through a single Cat5 cable is becoming a little bit different, right? So what we're seeing is the same threats that were relevant for applications, bots, malicious code, worms, anything of that nature that can still compromise our existing applications and assets is still there, and still we need to protect from that. But beyond the ability to potentially compromise accounts of our applications, now there's the kind of what replaced the physical security in the physical world and the kind of single point of entry and exit into your data center in that managed or owned internet connectivity world is the cloud platform. So now one can potentially take over your cloud platform, and once he does that and has control over the assets and your resources or your accounts in the cloud, he really has access to everything that you've been building into the cloud platform. So this really introduces a whole new set of a whole new threat vector and increases the attack surface, and we need to find a way to integrate our security controls into this new reality. And how do we really make sure, and again, the security is just as strong as our weakest link always. How do we make sure that security is strong enough also to not allow this threat vector to compromise our deployments and our applications and our overall digital footprint in the cloud? So compound that with the fact that the cloud platform itself, for instance, AWS is really leveraged in a way that is really part of the application lifecycle. So the API on the cloud is really part of the code of the application, part of a certain point in time delivery, part of a certain point in time version of the application would be also how the infrastructure is laid out for that application. So if we think about it, we need to make sure that whatever controls we put in place into protecting our applications also apply and also have visibility and reach into the platform itself, the cloud platform. So the cloud platform, again, whether it's managed through user interfaces or through the API and automated through the CI/CD pipelines or the DevOps methodologies, it's definitely something we want to make sure that our overall security posture is covering. So I'll talk a little bit more about that moving forward, but let me just share with you a few of the findings we found from a state of DevOps security study that we've actually ran with a few hundred respondents earlier this year, in the beginning of this year, in fact. So what we're seeing is that the highest gaps and risks are really around misconfigurations and compliance kind of monitoring and real-time visibility onto what's going on in my infrastructure. And that's probably the area where most of the customers are struggling with the most. And we're really trying to make sure that we give them the right tools to be able to address that. And again, with the right tools, it's not only about dedicated tools that potentially require new types of skills and capabilities, but actually being able to leverage a lot of the existing tools and skills in order to address these problems. So again, misconfigurations and compliance, kind of real-time monitoring have really been the things that have stood out here. So when we presented this earlier this month, or actually the late in May, the things that came back in terms of both the biggest challenge when it comes to DevOps security, as well as what's the current DevOps approach, we're seeing that most of the organizations are still not at the point where they're fully automated and the security practices are totally integrated with their DevOps practices or their software development practices on one hand. And we're also seeing that the kind of integration of the tools, the lack of integration of the tools is also something that's kind of holding back. So customers aren't really there from what we're seeing in terms of fully figuring out how do we integrate security into this new reality, really. So what we're really doing for our customers is we're offering a secure cloud adoption methodology, helping them kind of get in front of what their development teams are doing. And that's what we're really helping our customers promote inside their organizations. By first of all kind of looking at their existing security estate on premise. And again, we're focused primarily, not only, but very much on customers that have existing digital estate, existing data centers, existing private data centers, and they're extending and kind of migrating slowly, gradually for different use cases out to the cloud. So focusing on what they have now and realizing that their organization is moving ahead and starting with some initial cloud rollouts, we encourage and give our security counterparts in these customer organizations, again, security architects, network architects, security operations, and so forth, that we really encourage them to start experimenting themselves with the different tools that we offer to protect these applications so they can start being in that experimentation stage alongside with the software development teams, right? So be it FortiGates, next generation firewalls for ingress, egress protection, FortiWeb for pretty much everything in the cloud is web, be it an API or a front end of an application. FortiSandbox for all kinds of unsolicited file sharings and so forth. And then FortiCASB-Cloud, which controls a little bit more of the configuration in the cloud itself. And we'll give a few examples. So once they kind of deploy and start experimenting, and experimentation also in the security side is very important, they kind of figure out ways and how to roll this into their operational model. Again, and that would probably be the biggest challenge that we're hearing from customers is not only like what are the technical tools there, but how do we take a security operations person that's already oversubscribed from a workload perspective, and how do we add more requirements from him, more responsibilities to that person. And I think that would be probably the most recurring thing that we're hearing from customers. They're looking for leveraging their existing skill sets and how to extend them into the cloud. And really, so the second stage of after implementing and experimenting with the tools would be how do we bring this into our existing operational model more than anything else. So once that is kind of in place, and the operational model, there are some ideas around how this can integrate with the existing methodologies and existing ops. What we help our customers and kind of they're really in a better position to propose to the rest of their organization to really go ahead and deploy and increase their cloud footprint and start implementing again, whether it's containers, serverless-based applications, VM instances, other platform as a service offerings from the cloud, et cetera, anything pretty much that can come in AWS is definitely something that's much more comfortable to go ahead and kind of allow the organization to start implementing in production workloads after you've experimented and established these operational models around. So kind of this is a little bit of how our strategy is with our customers and how we're helping them with the breadth of product offerings available on AWS and on-premise. But now let's go back to the basics a little bit about security and how this comes to play with the interaction between the developer and the security operations folks, right? So some things really never change. When it comes to information security, the basics are pretty much the basics, right? You need to classify information, you need to define roles and responsibilities, and you need to enforce and implement least privilege. And that really doesn't change. But the thing that is something we need to take into account here is how do we implement this in an organization where there are developers that are tasked and goal to kind of move fast and build value and deliver value to the business. And there are security guys that are really more in charge of mitigating risk and kind of minimizing the exposure and the attack surface. So these are kind of competing things. So there are natural synergies, but a lot of it is about agreement and between the different parties and kind of them having that handshake and that contract between them of how do we exchange or how do we hand over information and responsibilities between ourselves, right? So for that, Fortinet has a very broad footprint in AWS. We offer everything from, again, web application security, network security, security intelligence, container-shaped, sandboxing, all these capabilities in AWS. We actually, if you type in the AWS Marketplace, you'll see that we have a fairly broad set of offerings and all very particularly integrated into the AWS platform to help bring value as fast as possible. But we'll focus today specifically in terms of how do we bring this into and bridge this into the application lifecycle on metadata-based policies. How do we leverage metadata? Kind of we talked about that information classification and so forth. We'll talk about web and API security a little bit, some of the offerings there. We'll talk about cloud security management. How do I manage the cloud platform itself, the security of the cloud platform? And then we'll talk a little bit about centralized visibility. How do I really, and this is kind of, I think, the holy grail and what's very unique about how we're helping our customers is the ability to really look at everything from the API through the web applications, through the network, through the cloud platform, look at it all through one single pane of glass and really streamline in it to your existing operational model. And I keep saying this operational model because at the end of the day, I think you've heard that from some of the keynotes as well. It's about empowering the existing personnel to do more with the tools that they have. And that's really, it's not necessarily about enriching the tool set, but really being able to look deeply and seriously into what you have and make the best out of it in order to mitigate your risk, right? So if you look at things from a kind of two perspectives, so software developer has a very particular view of the world, right? He wants to run fast, write code, iterate, move faster. I think some of the statistics we've learned is we do 44 times more code changes in a DevOps environment, which runs in the cloud, versus a kind of traditional waterfall-based environment, right? So they really want to run fast, the developer. And what the real tools that he has at his disposal, that he doesn't necessarily need to walk out of his realm and start playing with stuff that he's not familiar with, like firewall sandboxes, web application firewalls, security management tools, is really how does he annotate his code, how does he add some metadata descriptors into the code he's writing, how does he comply to certain standards throughout his process. And I think that would probably be one of the key pieces that we kind of want to be a little bit more particular about in an organization, and it's very helpful to really implement on the software development side, such that when the security guy goes out and says, okay, how do I implement least privilege, what's the best way to do that, then he has the right tools in place to actually perform that effectively, and by that kind of get to the point where different roles and responsibilities, different functions, services receive the right level of access and security and so forth. So I think these are very important things to always keep in mind. Keep the different functions in the organization in their comfort zone and don't really take them out of that, but actually find ways to bridge that and for them to effectively be able to interact with each other without adding too much friction to the process. And it's a lot about this. So one of the ways we're doing this is through the Fortinet Fabric connectors into AWS. What our Fabric connectors do is when, for instance, we'll have a bunch of FortiGates sitting in different regions, each protecting potentially different assets that are running on different virtual private VPCs, right? And again, these security policies can really extend themselves from AWS to your on-premise footprint. It doesn't really restrict itself. You can implement the same logical segmentation regardless of the physical placement of different resources and workloads. And that's the beauty about it. If your organization, from an information classification, tagging, and annotation standpoint, are kind of continuously implementing the same tools, across different environments, you can enforce consistent policy as well, right? So that would be the first tool, and these are some of the examples here of the different types of labels, even from EKS perspective, Kubernetes, Elastic Kubernetes Service perspective, that you can leverage inside your policies. So think of it in a way that you have one policy. This policy applies across multiple environments, and it only leverages, from a definition standpoint, logical labels and metadata of your assets and that are running inside the cloud or on your premise, right? So this is pretty powerful. Really relieves the need to, what IP is associated with what resource. You don't need to do that kind of exchange, or the developer needing to implement policy. Once we've defined, okay, here's how we classify the information in the services, here are the roles and responsibilities, permissions, kind of here's the policies, and then kind of the security guy has the whole ability to implement least privilege, really. So that would be one thing of a good way to establish that contract between the developers and the security teams in an effective way. Kind of be very clear and transparent about how we tag data. The other piece is a little bit about how do we actually protect APIs. So protecting APIs on our FortiWeb offering, which is can run either as a SaaS service, a EKS, it's actually on the ECS marketplace, or a virtual machine. There are different types of and also as part of our WAF rules for API Gateway, there are different types of capabilities that you would want to enable here, right? So this is very effective when you're starting to think of how do I secure Lambda functions behind API Gateway that I may be extending to the outside world. If I think of just protecting my applications themselves, or if I think of even protecting microservices inside of a container environment where different services are feeding off of each other, but I may be using a federation of services, different other third parties connecting into my infrastructure as well. So there are many different use cases, and increasingly, or pretty much absolutely so, more and more what we're seeing running on AWS is definitely web services based. So the ability to protect that and profile that is very important. And again, you can go any way from AWS WAF partner rules through to FortiWeb dedicated, again, either a container footprint or virtual machine footprint or SaaS application that has much more advanced validation in state relevant security enforcements as well. So these are different options, again, with web API usage and security that you can leverage from Fortinet, FortiWeb on different platforms, right? And moving on is a little bit about cloud security management and cloud security posture management. And I think one of the interesting products we've announced in April, and we're starting to get pretty good traction around, is our FortiCASB-Cloud. It starts all the way in the top from a dashboard view of your infrastructure, and you can drill down, and there's a bunch of different built-in CAS template validations, regulation validations, and so forth. But it can go all the way down to defining your own custom rules. Specifically, this case, we're seeing an example of defining an egress rule, making sure that every resource in the cloud has an egress rule associated with it. And this would be a custom rule that someone had put together, and it's kind of simple in this case, right? Making sure that there's a security group associated with each one of these resources. And then after we validate these rules, these custom rules, in pretty intuitive language that we put it together, we have the option to trigger different types of remediation options or notifications, SQS service, SNS service notifications, and so forth. So different options here as well. Pretty beneficial to customers to really be able to do that all through, again, through a single platform that is looking deep into their cloud, gives them all the resolution from the top level of their threat status, configuration, potential misconfigurations, traffic analysis in the cloud, data analysis, and so forth, all through a single platform. So, but bringing this all together, and we talked about quite a few things here, right? The key point is around a single pane of glass visibility. And I think for larger security operations teams where are still struggling with keeping up with day-to-day work, the ability to kind of represent everything from a single pane of glass is something that's very powerful. And we're offering it as a quite unique integrated solution. Right? So what we're seeing is that FortiCASB-Cloud of itself, looking at the cloud platform, gives you that cloud platform security posture visibility. It all plugs into FortiAnalyzer, right, from multiple pluggable dashboards, widgets, and so forth. And then FortiWeb can front-end your different APIs or applications that are sitting in the cloud, also providing different dashboards plugging into FortiAnalyzer, and then FortiGate also protecting all your ingress, egress protection. So pretty much with a single suite of tools, all visible through one single pane of glass, you can cover both the kind of cloud platform security as well as the cloud network security, and really provide very powerful options for your developers to go ahead and run at their own pace while you continuously enforce the policy. So I think this is one of the interesting solutions out there, and unique in the very pragmatic approach and effective approach to kind of leverage existing human resources and existing personnel and kind of extend their existing skill sets and kind of make them relevant to the cloud without being an expert on each and every new cloud feature, new AWS service that's coming out, but still remain effective in security. So that was that. Please find more information about our AWS solutions on Fortinet.com/AWS. And yeah, looking forward to see you all using Fortinet solutions, Fortinet Cloud Security Solutions soon. So thanks. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Good time.
Anyone has a question, I can bring you the microphone. Going once, going twice? I think you're good.
OK, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Lior.